get started this evening. Boy, the sound on this is much better than the other one I was working with. So we appreciate you being here with us today to kick off this hurricane season. We have a lot to cover this evening, so I appreciate everyone coming here, and I know you all got your come in the door early prizes, so I appreciate that, and I hope you put those to good use. There's fans and lanterns, so we appreciate you using those to your benefit. I'm Kimberly Spill-Cristiano, and I'm the city's emergency management administrator. I've worked here for the last 17 years, and this is something that we do on an annual basis. What we've noticed is that we have a lot of new people coming into the city, a lot of growth, a lot of great things happening in Pompano Beach. Pompano Beach is where it's at, right? We keep hearing that, and more people are coming to our great city. So we want to make sure that we're prepared for the season, right? We're going to be prepared. So the mayor usually attends with us here, and he unfortunately wasn't able to attend tonight. He had unforeseen circumstances, but he is with us, and he sends his very best to all of us here in the city. And this is pretty much what we're going to be covering this evening. Why prepare, right? That's always one of the questions. Why do we need to do this? You know, we talked a little bit even before when some people were getting seated. I'm like, why do we do this? And I do see a lot of our CERT volunteers. That's our Community Emergency Response Team volunteers. There's a lot of things that we do all year long to prepare for storms. And that's for ourselves, our families, and for our businesses, right? And in our workplaces. Emergency communications, vital, right? A lot of times when we do our disaster drills and exercises, the first thing that comes up afterwards is what fails first, what's hardest to maintain, what kind of systems. Hey, technology is great while it works, right? So we're going to go into some of those things and things that we can do to benefit that. And I should have mentioned too, if you have phones, if you could put them on vibrate, we would appreciate it. So also our emergency management webpage. We consider this our one-stop shop planning tool so that even if you don't remember anything that we told you right now, it's going to be, the session is recorded. It'll be on YouTube. It'll be on our webpage. And all of our tips that go onto our webpage, everything is there, and we consider that the one-stop shop so that there's one place that you can go to. So we'll talk more about that. Important tips like debris and tree trimming and sandbags. We get those phone calls right away, sandbags. Do you need them? Where should you keep them? Where should they be placed? And all of those great things. And hurricane season, making good decisions. Our guest speaker this evening is Rob Moyeda, meteorologist in charge, recently promoted. And he is from the National Weather Service at the Miami South Florida Weather Office. And he trekked all the way up here from Miami, fought the traffic to get here today, and we're grateful. And we have many years of running and doing that. But what I want to touch on, and as we go into the presentation, so here, food and water resources, days following landfall. What this is a graph that comes from the Florida Department of Emergency Management at the state level. Dear friends of ours as well. We work very closely with the county and the state. And what this diagram shows you is why you have to be prepared for the amount of time that we say. Now, we recommend 7 days, okay? 7 days, and there's a reason behind that. It's not like, we used to say 3 days. 5 days sometimes you would hear. 7 days is really the minimum. And the minimum, I say that because look what first 1 to 5 days, that is your stocked, your canned goods, all of those things that you keep in your supply stash, whether it's your go kit if you evacuate or if it's in your home if you don't have to evacuate. Now, within that time frame, because think about it this way. We talked a little bit about Hurricane Andrew, and that was a large, it was a high category storm. It wasn't a large storm, but it was a high category storm, category 5. And what that did, right, there was roadways are gone, right? And down in Miami, it's hard to get things funneled down from FEMA or all the way down through all of our thoroughfares and all of our highways and all of the infrastructure that we depend on, because it takes that time for things to start to come down. Even though they're staged, they're pre-staged, we can see this type of a storm coming, a lot of that infrastructure might be jeopardized. Is there enough fuel? Is there damage and debris all over the roads so they're just impassable and they're not able to get here? So even if we wanted to, the very next day, because we hunker down in the Emergency Operations Center, and even if we wanted to start up shop and start handing out, water the next day, we probably wouldn't be able to. We have our own debris and our own debris removal and contracts, and we have all of these layers and things that we do to prepare. However, logistically, it just may not be possible. So that's when the first 4 or 5 days. Then we start to say, okay, now we're going to start to be able to set up those points of distribution that you've seen, in previous years in Community Park, or you'll see that we do that for sandbags before a storm. In those kinds of situations, that's what we will do during that time. Now, if you look at that, now that's days 6 through 10, and then after that, then we start to get those food kitchens coming, right? And the faith-based groups and those volunteer groups, the heroic folks that volunteer across the nation that are coming to help, right? But before that, I try to explain that Florida, it's a peninsula, but it's kind of like an island, right? It's really hard to get things down here and to logistically do that. Now, you might have seen for Hurricane Ian, I responded to Hurricane Ian, I responded to Surfside, I responded and even in Texas for an incident. And depending on the logistical issues at hand, it just might not be possible. And what we saw for Hurricane Ian on the West Coast, at the end of 22, was, a good amount of devastation, and boats everywhere, and all of those different kinds of things. So just a lot of different things that, are considerations that we do the best that we can, and even trying to get to some of our, our backed up 911 calls. So your city's emergency response team, we talked a little bit about this to some of our guests here tonight before some others were arriving and before we started. This is, you don't have to memorize this, we'll not be a test on this later, okay? So this is our organization chart. This is how we operate. Now, every single employee fits into this organization chart, one way, shape, or form. Even if they are part of our alternate shifts, if they are people that, all right, we start here, but we know we're gonna have to, hey, it's hot out there, and if we're giving out, food and water, what are we gonna have to do? We're gonna have to replenish some, our staff, and, they can only go for so long, that kind of a thing. So these are the kind of, I just wanted you all to just see this, that, we had a workshop this morning for our EOC, Emergency Operations Center staff, along with some others from their emergency response team. Just describing that. We have people in every area. So even finance, our finance department, right? People who don't have an emergency role on a day-to-day basis, like fire or police, they are in our EOC. Our finance director, finance staff, critical. They make sure our documentation is getting done. Why? Because we want to get reimbursed from FEMA, right? That is really important, because as fast as that money is going out the door, we need to make sure we're going to be able to recoup it. Operations, that is, it's led by our fire department, and within that you have our utilities, right? Our utilities, so keeping the sewage out of the streets and the water running, hopefully, or getting it back up and running and not having a boil water, as much as to minimize the damage from that. Parks and Recreation, they have a huge role. They help us with the points of distribution. They help with transportation. They have a lot of people and a lot of resources that we can lean into. Obviously, law enforcement with BSO, traffic control, making sure that we don't have people going over the bridge that aren't supposed to, or going into areas that they're not supposed to. And Parks and Recreation, I mentioned that, Public Works, Environmental, services, protection, environmental services, right? We have our director here. He's going to be presenting. And did I miss anybody? I don't think I missed anybody. But that gives you just, a gist of how our plan works with that. Our planning department, even our planners, the people who write plans every day, they're in there making sure we do what? We call it our battle rhythm, to make sure we're staying on track, we're getting those reports out, we're getting the information out to you, right? Because you're gonna want information. What are y'all doing over there, right? What are you doing? Are you doing anything over there? That kind of a thing. We wanna make sure we're communicating to the best of our ability what we're doing, and making sure we're staying on task with our objectives, because we need to prioritize what we're gonna get done first and what we're gonna get done in that sequence. And logistics, our purchasing department, which is also called general services for us, they house all of our contracts. So if anybody wants to buy something, they need to run it through our purchasing department. And we make sure, because we're all using our same shared assets and shared resources, so we need to make sure we're using our own stuff first. And if we don't have it, we go to purchasing. We're like, hey, do we have an emergency contract already set up for this? No? Is there like a state contract that we can get this from, or something else? We have debris contracts that Russ is going to be talking about later. We have a lot of different contracts in place just for this reason. So, and communication contracts for emergency communication. So all of those kinds of things. So that gets all run through them. And it all runs very smoothly, right? But before we move on to Sandra, we're going to be talking about your personal plan, but I wanted you to see that was our plan, so that you do know, not only do we take care of our family and ourselves, et cetera, to get ready to go to the Emergency Operations Center, to go into lockdown, we also make sure that the city is prepared. So, and with that, I'll bring up Sandra King. She is our Strategic Communications Administrator, who does a phenomenal job of making sure that we can communicate.
Thank you, Kimberly. Can you hear me okay with this? Not very much, huh? Hello, hello? Much better. I got to get really close. Hi, everybody. So what is the most important thing when the storm hits? People look at government, our website. Maybe it's a little boring. It's got stuff about government and stuff. But let me tell you something. When that storm comes along, you want information, and you want it now. You don't fool around. And it's one thing when I put out press releases, and that goes out to the media. It also gets posted on our website. But I also send a copy to Broward County. And if you remember in the storms, Broward County's mayor gives press conferences a few times a day. Well, I'm passing along my press releases so that if there's something I need them to get out, at least they can put it out. Doesn't guarantee the media is going to cover it, but I put it out. So press releases are there. If you think about it also, what's the most important place nowadays people are getting their information? Social media and the computer. So now I have my webmaster who is in the EOC with me, putting out information, and we're posting momentarily, daily. What happened? There we go. There's the press release. Code Red, we're going to talk about that a little bit, but Code Red, as you know, is the emergency notification service that is vital in a storm. Because if there is a dire emergency and we have water being given out, we have food being given out, we have road closures, we have all kinds of emergency things, we're going to use the Code Red system to go out to everyone's phone. So you can sign up for Code Red. You can sign your phone, your phone, your phone, and your brother's phone, and your mother's phone. You don't have to live in the city of Pompano Beach. You may have relatives that want to know what's happening in Pompano Beach. Sign up for Code Red. Get your neighbors to sign up for Code Red, because that becomes an emergency lifeline during an emergency. So what do the news cover during a storm? That's a network, and so where are they going to be at? They're going to be at where the big damage is, where the bridge collapsed, and they're going to be in the wind and doing this, and so are they going to be covering Pompano Beach? Chances are no. Are they going to be covering the stuff that we want to put out? Where our water is? No. They're going to be covering the biggest, most damaged and dramatic places that are happening when a storm hits. So I don't count on network news to cover what I need to have covered. So therefore, there's our go-to. That's our city's website. So that's the homepage. It doesn't normally look like that, but during a storm, we put up a banner that says storm information, and you click on that, and that'll bring you to the emergency management page that gives you everything you need to know about Pompano Beach's situation. It's also, people will say, well, I couldn't find it. So we made a huge banner just like that so people can click on it and get what they need. On that web page, that is the emergency management page, we actually link live to NOAA's server. So you're actually seeing a live satellite picture. We also put up all of Broward County's emergency information. We link to them. So we have information about Broward County. There's also a satellite picture, and we've also got our press releases up there, and anything about Pompano Beach is going to be listed on that website. So we ask people, go to that website. That's the clearinghouse for information. So you talked about social media, and that's kind of a dicey subject because social media, Facebook, Nextdoor, it's kind of, some of it's really useful and helpful, and some of it's gossip, okay? So it's also about back and forth information. So when we get a post on our social media channels, we respond within 48 hours. Of course, people may post something silly, then we wouldn't respond. But one of the things we do during an emergency, during a storm, is we go what's called go dark on social media. So we don't want people, number one, we're not going to post about summer camp when there's a hurricane, Cat 5, coming our way. And that can really anger people when we're talking about, oh, hey, did you know that you can get a free token if you come to our pool? What? There's a storm coming. So we stop all of that chatter whatsoever. And we put a message up there that says, go to the city's website. Here it is. This is where we want you to go. The other danger with posting on social during an emergency is people are going to write in, and they're going to write all kinds of questions. Is Publix open? Questions that we might not be able to answer, but we want to be able to get to them and make sure we give them the proper information and respond to them. And we may get 100,000 questions about their street, about their neighbor, about the neighbor's garbage, about the neighbor's tree. What are you going to do about this? There's a line down. We don't want to become FP&L. So we go dark on social, and we tell people to go to the website. That's where you're going to get the information that you need. We also have an app, and so it's My Pompano, and you can get that in your app store, whether it's iPhone or Android. And a little story, as we're evolving in technology, not everybody is technology savvy. So we were in a meeting a few years ago, and a woman stood up and she said, by the way, you had nothing on your website about the storm. And I said, ma'am, we worked 24 hours a day to post everything on that website. And she said, there was nothing. And I said, can you tell me what you were looking at? And she said, it was all these little icons were going, and I said, ma'am, that's our app. And she said, yeah, it's your website. So she didn't know. It's not her fault. She didn't know, but she thought that was our website. So we have subsequently added a hurricane, you can see it on the bottom left, icon, so that if somebody does happen to accidentally land on our app thinking it's our website, that will link them to our website. So that's on us. It wasn't on her. She didn't know, we should have covered. So that was done a few years ago, but that's just to make sure that if somebody does happen to not know, they'll get that information. And so with that, I will turn it over to Crystal, but again, go to our website, sign up for Code Red, and get your information so we can make sure that you're having the most up-to-date information on this city, not Miami, not Fort Lauderdale. We want to know what's going on in this city. Where is our water? What's going on? So thank you very much. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Sandra. So yes, as you mentioned, Ms. Crystal Aaron has been with our fire department now since 2019, I believe, and she even went through COVID with us. But she's been with the city, I think, 10 years now, over 10 years. So please welcome Crystal Aaron, our Emergency Management Coordinator.
Good evening. Ooh, everybody hungry or something? Good evening. Oh, that's better, that's better. So as Kimberly mentioned, I am the Emergency Management Coordinator for the fire department for the beautiful city of Pompano. And tonight, I'm just gonna go over the one-stop shop and then some preparedness items that you can get prepared with today. So our one-stop shop it was designed as a valuable tool, a planning tool to just serve just as that. It's to link you to all the major agencies like NOAA, the Broward County, to weather service updates. You can add to the Code Red that Sandra mentioned earlier. You can find that on our emergency management page. You can you can take a picture of this and remember and save the web page to your favorites. So it's Pompano Beach FLs/get ready. So we're now 5 days into hurricane season, and with that, although we're early into hurricane season, the key to preparedness is to prepare early, prepare now. So you're still at a good time where you can get all your preparedness items that you need. And we're counting on your personal preparedness because remember that our everyday emergencies are still happening. They're in the city. So your personal preparedness is key to overcoming events such as hurricanes. But know that our one-stop shop page is not just geared towards hurricanes. It's an all-hazard page. So whatever emergencies that we have going on, this is your one-stop shop. Now, let's determine your risks. Find out today what types of wind and water hazards could happen where you live. Hurricanes are not just a coastal problem. Impacts from wind and water can be felt hundreds of miles inland. So you want to know that regardless of where you are, you want to know if you live in an area that's prone to flooding and if you're in an evacuation zone. How many people know if they're in an evacuation zone? Ooh, we're gonna check today, right? So you wanna know for sure if you're in an evacuation zone, and then identify any structural weaknesses that you have in your home. All right, develop an evacuation plan. If you're at risk from hurricane impact, you want to know if you're at risk from hurricane impacts, you need to develop an evacuation plan. Now is the time to begin planning where you would go and how you would get there. You do not need to travel hundreds of miles. You just need a designation of a friend or a relative that has a well-built home outside of flood-prone areas. Be sure to account for your pets, and if you don't have a vehicle, check with the local officials to see what transportation options are available. And just one thing on shelters. Shelters, what we consider, are like a life raft. They're not a cruise ship. So if they're open, they're available if they're open. Not all shelters open at the same time. We do have one in Pompano Beach, which is Pompano High School. But again, because a hurricane may be coming, doesn't mean that a shelter will automatically open. You want to check your local news to see what shelters are opening and prepare accordingly. Know that you're not going to be on a cruise ship or hotel, and know that it's more of a last resort. We encourage you as a last resort. So if you could go stay with a family or a friend, please do so. Let's talk about your written plan, your communication plan. Take the time now to write your plan, your hurricane plan, and share it with your family. Determine family meeting places and make sure to include out-of-town contact in case of evacuation. We ask that you could to have an out-of-town contact, because if you have a local contact and they're going through the same thing that you're going through, then if communication lines are down, to have a local contact is not going to be helpful because they're experiencing the same outages as you are. Write down on the paper a list of emergency contacts. Make sure to include utilities and critical services. Remember, the internet may not be available during or after the storm. Let's assemble those disaster supplies and get in your go kit. You're going to need supplies not just through the storm, but potentially for a lengthy and unpleasant aftermath. Having enough non-perishable food and water and medicine to last each person and your family for a minimum of 7 days. Electricity and water could be out for at least that long. You'll need extra cash, and we recommend you to have small bills on hand in case their ATM is not working or so have small bills on hand. A battery-powered radio and flashlights. You may need to have a portable crank or a solar-powered USB charger for your cell phones. Fill your prescriptions and have medicines on hand. And then if you are planning to leave, make sure you have several routes plan for several routes, because if everyone is waiting at the last minute to leave, then you've seen it on the news where they have the lines backed up, people running out of gas becomes an issue. So you want to plan for several routes, and then if you're planning to leave, plan early and leave early enough so that you can try to avoid those traffic jams. And one last thing in regards to non-perishable food and your comfort food, listen, I said it this morning in the presentation, I say it all the time, do not eat your hurricane supplies. Not eat your hurricane food, because right. I'm going to see you on TV and you right back in line the day before the storm trying to re-up on your tuna, your Cheetos that you happen to eat while you were, snacking one day, and you dipped in it too much and you out of it. So now you got to go back in line, stand in the long lines. You may have to get an off-brand Cheeto because that's all that's left. So try not to eat your hurricane supplies. Build your kit. Let your kit stay. I'm sure most of the items can last until November 30th, the end of the hurricane season. Try to not eat your comfort food items. Of course, pay attention to the expiration dates, but we want that you are prepared and that you have the most comfortable items that you would like. I don't want you to have to get off-brand water because you waited to the last minute. And we don't want you to panic either. A lot of times when people wait to the last minute, they're going to grab everything off the shelves. And for me, I'm going to leave all the Vienna sausages for you. I am not going to get those because that is not one of my comfort foods that I'm going to buy. But in the event, if I had to, I would grab it. But if I wasn't prepared, I will be grabbing those Vienna sausages. So if you ever see me with Vienna sausages, I waited to the last minute, but that's never going to be the case. All right. Tax holiday. Tax holiday started June 1st, and it goes until June 14th, and we have another one that starts in August. It is the time to buy your emergency-related items. So now we talked about a few of items that you can start building your kit with: the food, batteries, flashlights, and you're going to have a chance to win some emergency preparedness items tonight. So you want to start building those kits and get ready for a great hurricane season. All right. And, okay, let's talk about CERB. Some of my volunteers are in the crowd tonight. If you're in the crowd tonight, say hey.
Yeah, we love
So our
those
community,
people.
hey.
Ooh.
So these are individuals that are part of our community emergency response team. They have gone through the 8-week course that we offer a free training to Pompano Beach residents and business owners that's within the city of Pompano. We have another class starting in the fall that we'll be posting dates for. But again, you can find that information on our one-stop shop. Literally the only page you probably really need to keep in your ready and available is the one-stop shop page. So we teach in the community emergency response team trainings, life-saving skills. One of the favorite classes is fire suppression. Everybody usually enjoys that class. We do medical operations. We go over psychology and so much more to help you prepare for you and your family, and then go out into the community. Again, as prepared as you are, that helps us, especially when we're running emergency calls, because remember, the emergencies, the everyday emergencies don't stop. And that is my time. Thank you.
Thank you, Crystal. Nicely done, nicely done. I saw a lot of people relating to the getting into your snacks early. I don't do that. Yeah, and one of the other items that the state has been asking us to communicate, which was a really good point about fueling up. They say throughout this hurricane season, if you haven't already heard this one yet, this is a great takeaway. Keep your fuel tank at half so that you don't end up in those long lines. We don't have to, right? And that's something that I practice most of the time. But it's really good practical advice. And I am a big BOGO person all year long. So if there's something I peruse to make sure it's something that I eat, that I don't just buy the Vienna sausages or those other little things that I don't eat just because it's a BOGO. But if there's things like that, look, that's a great way to make it economical to prepare. And now we'll move on to Russ Ketchum. He's the Environmental Services Director. And we're very happy to have him here. He's been here, boy, a lot longer than I have been. A long time. Thank you, Russ.
Long time. Do I get the clicker? I don't get the clicker? Do I have anything? I get the clicker. So my name is Russell Ketchum. I am the Director of Environmental Services. What does that mean? So I'm the garbage man for the city. I've been with the city 22 years, been in this business about 40. Run 9 storms anyway, been in this mix for a long time. So I'm not really 100% sure because Kim put this together for me, so we're going to just kind of go from here. Okay, so we're going to hold right here. Why am I going to hold right here? Because that's already saying 24 to 36 hours. I want to talk about even before then, like now. Okay, so some of the things that we get a lot of in our normal day in and day out business is, oh, there's a hurricane coming, I'm going to go ahead and chop down this tree, and I know we're 12 hours out, but I'm going to do it anyway, and can you come pick it up because it's, it's there and it's going to become a missile. I hear that a lot. So please don't do that. So the time to trim your trees actually was probably April, May, even better. We all remember Andrew with an A. What's that mean? That means it was in like early in the storm, yeah, first one. So don't think, oh, well, traditionally we have a storm. If we're going to have a storm, it's going to be in August, September, even October. May not be. So when you take a look at those big trees, please trim them now. Reason number 2 is because the person that you're going to call, because odds are it's not going to be you, well, they're busy as well. So when you call Johnny Smith to cut down your tree, he's going to say, sure, I'll get to it in November. And you're going to say, well, wait, but there's a storm coming in. He says, yeah, I know. I got 200 people ahead of you. So the time to do it is now. We can also remove your material, okay? So I say all these things because a lot of people, again, I hear buzz saws. I've been going through this a long time. I hear saws when we're taking people off the road because it's too windy. I'm taking garbage crews off the road, and I still hear the guy with the chainsaw cutting his stuff down. Number 2, so we have a storm coming in, and everybody's all nervous about the projectiles. It's a missile, okay? I have coconuts. My neighbor has coconuts and all that, okay? If your tree has coconuts on them, please, cut them down ahead of time. Let them lay, tie them up, move them closer to the house or whatever the case may be. It takes over 200 miles an hour for a coconut to be lifted out and moved through your window. So at that point, not only is a coconut moving through your window, but the neighbor's cat, lawnmower, car, you name it, all bets are off. Don't worry about the coconut. There's a whole lot more behind it, okay? Your garbage, we get this also. Oh, today's my garbage day. You're going to pick up my garbage. Well, yeah, we are. We're going to run until it gets to about 40 miles an hour. That's by contract. At 40 miles an hour, the crews come off. And people go, well, why? Why? It's only 40 miles an hour. True. But they have to come in. They have to drop off their truck. They have to secure their truck. And they have to go home and start their battening down of the hatches, if you will. So what does that mean? Well, my garbage normally gets picked up at 5 o'clock p.m. What time you put it out? 4 o'clock. Don't. If it's your garbage day, put it out in the morning, 7 o'clock. Why? Because what we do is all bets are off on how we route things. We route them from the beginning to the end, and then we route them from the end to the beginning. So you're going to have a garbage truck in front of your house at 7 a.m., and you're going to go, oh, but he's normally out here till 3 p.m. No, put it out early. Try to get your garbage can dumped. If you miss it, or if it's out and we've pulled trucks in, pull it to your house, okay? If it's an empty garbage can, lay it down. It will fly around. Don't worry, we'll get you a new one and all that. Okay, so now we're 24 to 36 out before the storm. So again, we're going to be running as much material as we can. It is not the time to trim. We're trying to remove stuff and batten down. We have a whole laundry list of other stuff that we have to do. So please don't do that. And inevitably, it happens. So you can look at the next guy and say, time to prepare is now. Okay, cannot stress that enough. And you're going to hear that as repetitive over and over. Do this now, do this now. Knock on wood, the last time we had some kind of event was 2017. It wasn't a big deal. It wasn't uncomfortable. But we kind of get complacent. Oh, well, that was 2017. Wow. Yeah. And when it comes, all of a sudden it turns into, a big fire drill. So before the storm, there we go. Put material in the containers, neat piles. Please don't go crazy with land clearing and all the other stuff. And I'm going to chop down this banyan tree because, okay, if it's been up, keep it up. And at that point, leave it alone. So now we got our debris. Now the storm's come through. Now it's made its mess. Now what do? So basically what we need to do is we need to make these piles manageable. After the storm, by the way, garbage service will resume. That's your household garbage recycling as well. But your bulky waste, again, if it is storm debris, it comes out to the road. Again, now is not the time to say, well, I'm going to clean out my garage. Please don't do that. We go into just picking up the debris and all that. So we want to have it kind of separated out, which your vegetation, you can see, is pretty self-explanatory. If it's a bigger storm, you got your structural debris. Again, that's going to be in a separate pile. It needs to be on the roadside, okay? Don't put it near your house. We will not go from basically the sidewalk, if you have one, to your house. That's off limits. We don't go on private property. So you want to put it close to the curb because we have very large trucks that with very big claws. So you can have this. By the way, this is all going to be on the web, so you don't need to worry about it. That is probably not the best approach for a number of reasons, okay? One, it's just all over the place, and it's just, it's too far away. It's just a hot mess, okay? Sandbags, my favorite. So anytime I get a rain, do we give out sandbags? No, we don't. But when we do, this is pretty much the information you're going to get. Historically, we've been on 10th Street, right by the baseball fields, where we have the household hazardous waste events, for all those of you that have gone to those. We do the sandbagging event. There will be publications, notices, so forth, that we're going to be giving them out. It's 10 per household. You do get this, some information. We don't want to just give you the sandbags and say, see you later. But they should be used to try to block off the water in any kind of entry places in your house. Again, the hurricane guide, that's also something that's going to be on the web, and it's going to be the same stuff that you're hearing today. The main thing is when the storm comes and it makes its mess, it takes time to gear up. Okay? That's kind of the takeaway. It takes time to get the crews down. The crews are coming in from all over the nation, literally all over the nation. We have to get our stuff together because there is a priority of stuff that we need to do. We need to make sure the roads are clean. It's called the push. Okay, so we're gonna open up the roads for emergency ambulances, traffic flow, and so forth. And there's kind of a priority list that we have. Then that's going to take a little bit of time. Then we go into the recovery the recovery portion of it. Again, it takes sometimes a couple of days, 2 or 3 days, before you start seeing that. It also gives you the opportunity to bring stuff to the curb. Sometimes people don't have that opportunity. They don't have their relative or crew, whatever, to come help them bring the stuff on the curb. Don't worry. We make multiple passes, okay? So we'll make a 1 pass, and then we go to the next area. We'll come back around a week, 2, 3, 4, doesn't matter. Make a next pass. Oh, well, I missed that one too, or I still have more stuff. That's fine, because we start looking at the materials and where they're at. If there are materials that are out there that need to be done again, we make a multiple passes, okay? And again, all this information has it on there. So we've been pretty fortunate here in Pompano. As we've all heard, the storms, the seasons are getting bigger, badder, meaner, okay? Really would love to hear one time I got on the beginning of season and said, well, it's a boring year though we think we're going to have nothing. That would be awesome. Never hear that. It's always the biggest, baddest, and they have reason. This is what they do. We've been fortunate. The storms that have hit Pompano, probably Wilma has been the most active. That was a real rainy one. It knocked down a lot of trees because it saturated. We had water saturation before the storm hit, so it dropped a lot of trees. If we have a larger storm, okay, that's really when the level of seriousness, and I'm not saying maybe that's the wrong term, but there's going to be all kinds of stuff. You guys are going to be stressed because why? Your roof is gone, okay? Your boat that was in the backyard in the canal is now on the front lawn, okay, or somebody else's boat, or, whose is that? What's an airplane doing here? It gets to be more complicated in the recovery. So if you have a boat, an airplane, a car that got washed away, remember, that's still your item. That still belongs to you. I can't come in and say, okay, we're going to clean the street and throw all this stuff away. It doesn't work that way. So please make sure that there's information, which is typically registrations, license plates, and so forth, because we need to go and say, okay, you're missing a plane? We may have your plane. You have an opportunity to get your plane. Otherwise, I'm going to take your plane because I got to do things. Now, what will happen is I'll either push your plane off the side of the road or I will load it up on a truck and bring it somewhere. So again, keep that stuff in mind. Knock on wood, we're going to have nothing but a vegetation, or better yet, just a rainstorm, and we get some kites, and that's awesome. Okay? I'm okay with that. Really, I am. So again, the main thing is, cut your trees now. Get ready. Don't worry. We will clean it up. Trust me. We'll get in there. We clean it up. We have a plan. We disseminate the crews based on the need and where it is, and we go from there. So I appreciate everybody's time. May it be a boring storm, and hopefully see you next year to say, wow, wasn't that a boring year? Thanks.
Thank you, Russ, for wishing for a boring storm. We were just saying, Rob and I, there are no boring storms. Even the ones that end up being not a lot, we still end up gearing up. We still end up going through all the motions. By the time anything actually ever hits, if it hits or doesn't hit, we're exhausted. So, great information, and people always want to hear all of that information right away. I gave Rob my lapel. As we bring up Rob Molleda, he has been with us for a number of years as our special guest, and we're very fortunate to have him. He is now just recently promoted to the meteorologist in charge, as I mentioned before. So I want you to pay careful attention to what he says. There's some key messages this year, especially about rapid intensification. That's something that we really need to pay very close, careful attention to. With that, Rob?
All right. All right. Thank you, Kimberly. It's great to be back here in Pompano Beach. Ooh, getting a lot of feedback here. 1 second. Let's see if we can. Yeah, maybe. Okay, let's see. What about now? Okay. Well, I think we're good. Well, no, we still got some feedback. Let's see, what about here? Okay, I don't hear anything now. All right, let's give it a try. All right, well, thank you. Great to be here, like I said, in Pompano Beach for another hurricane kickoff meeting. It's been a number of years that I've had the pleasure to come here and talk to you about hurricane season. So here we are, another hurricane season. And let's look back at just really quickly at last year, because it's good to put things in perspective. So 2023 actually ended up being a pretty active year. If you look at the numbers, right? If you look at the overall number of storms, we had 20 named storms. That's well above the average of 14. We had 7 hurricanes and 3 major hurricanes. Those are right at the average of what, the averages are based on a 30-year period. But if you look at the map carefully and you look at Florida, you'll see the vast majority of the storms that occurred last year remained well to the east of Florida. In other words, they didn't really get close to us or even affect us here in Florida. So it's not just about the numbers. It's really about where they form and where they go, which ultimately determines whether we get hit or whether we have a boring season, which I think last year for the most part, yeah, we didn't get any direct impacts from any storms last year. So it's something to keep in mind when we now talk about this year's outlook, and the one that we've all, I think a lot of us or most of us here have seen and heard over the last few weeks. So one of the big factors that we look at when the seasonal forecasts come out and when they come up with that forecast is which phase of this ENSO cycle. ENSO refers to either El Nino or La Nina. They're opposite phases of the same cycle. So these are cycles of warm and cold waters in the Pacific Ocean. So you're probably wondering, well, what does the Pacific Ocean have to do with us? Well, I'll explain that here in a second. So before that, though, let's show the numbers for the outlook for 2024. So this is the NOAA outlook that was released in late May, and it's showing anywhere from 17 to 25 named storms to form this year over the entire, anywhere in the Atlantic, not everywhere, but anywhere in the Atlantic. Of those, 8 to 13 could become hurricanes, and of those, 4 to 7 could become major hurricanes, which are category 3 or higher. Compare those to the normal values, well above the normal values, there's an 85% chance that we're gonna have an above normal number of storms. So we look at the water temperatures in the Atlantic Ocean. So that red circle in the Atlantic is showing where the waters are been running really warm, and actually they've been running warm since last year, and they're expected to remain pretty warm throughout the season. So that's one of the main factors contributing to this outlook showing an above normal number of storms. The other thing we look at is the Pacific Ocean, as I mentioned before. So when the waters in the Pacific Ocean are actually running cooler than normal, like they are now, that means that we're transitioning from the last year's El Nino period to a La Nina episode. So La Nina is defined as colder than normal waters in the equatorial Pacific Ocean. So again, why do we look at the Pacific Ocean? Well, because past years have told us that when that cycle goes back and forth from El Nino to La Nina, it does have an influence on Atlantic hurricane seasons. We've noted that many times in the past, so we can make a connection. There's a scientific connection that we can make. And what that is for the Atlantic is for more storms than normal. And the chances that we're going to flip over to this La Nina period, or in other words, that these waters are going to remain relatively cool in the Pacific Ocean, are pretty high. Actually, for this hurricane season, we're looking at greater than 80% chance from our computer models, which are pretty reliable, that we're going to be in this La Nina period. So this La Nina phase, I should say. So La Nina, again, based on many past occurrences, leads to or sets the stage for conditions to be more conducive for more hurricanes, more storms to form in the Atlantic Ocean in our part of the world, due to lighter winds aloft, which means that storms can grow vertically and not get sheared off, and the tops can't get sheared off, so they grow vertically, and that promotes more storms and stronger storms to form, more moisture available in the tropical Atlantic for clouds to form and low pressure areas to form, which are the seedlings for hurricanes. And lastly, those warm waters in the Atlantic that I talked about. So cool waters in the Pacific, warm waters in the Atlantic, that's usually a recipe for active hurricane seasons. So it's kind of what we talked about here. This slide summarizes what I just mentioned. We've had some recent examples of this. 2020 was the most active hurricane season on record. Does anyone remember how many storms we had? We had 30. So 30 would totally blow away this year's forecast of 17 to 25. But does anyone remember 2020 as being a really bad hurricane season for us? No. You know why? Because, well, we didn't get hit by a hurricane. We got very lucky or fortunate that in 2020, we got affected by a couple of tropical storms that really weren't terribly bad for us. Now, the unlucky place, or one of the unlucky places in 2020 was Louisiana. They got hit by 3 hurricanes. Their coastline is a lot smaller than ours, than Florida's coastline is. So think about that. A smaller area like Louisiana got hit 3 times by hurricanes. And there were big ones. They weren't just, well, there's no such thing as a small hurricane. But these were major, a couple of them were major hurricanes. That was a La Nina hurricane season. So was 2022, another active year. And that was the year that Hurricane Ian hit Southwest Florida. So here's the list of names for the season. So pick your name there. If your name's on there, well, hopefully it won't be a noteworthy storm. If there's 21 names on that list, so the 21's like right in the middle of the range of the forecast that we're showing of 17 to 25. So if we exceed that, there's an alternate list of names that again will alternate female and male names. This is the reason we need to be ready. So we could talk about La Nina all day long. We could talk about the numbers of the forecast all day long, but that does not tell us, none of that information tells us where the storms are going to form later in the season, how strong they might get, and what areas might be impacted. What specific areas? Yeah, we know the Atlantic is pretty vast, right? So, what we're interested in here is South Florida. Is South Florida going to get hit this year? I can't really give you a confident answer at the beginning of hurricane season because we don't have the tools to tell you this far in advance where the weather systems are going to be months from now that will dictate where storms end up going. If we had that information, that would be great as far as us being ready or getting prepared ahead of time. We just don't have that information. So this is the reason why we need to get ready. This is our hurricane history. This map shows the tracks of all the centers, the tracks of the centers of all the hurricanes that have passed within 60 miles of any point in Broward County. So I could change the county to Palm Beach or Miami-Dade or any other county in South Florida. The map would look very similar. In other words, what we see here is this, Florida, especially southern Florida, is a highly hurricane-prone region based on our history. We've been hit by hurricanes as much, if not more, than any other coastal location in the United States. So this is why we need to be ready every year. We're in hurricane country. It's just a fact of life here in South Florida. Other parts of the country have their seasons. There's tornado season in the Midwest, for example. There's blizzards and other natural hazards in other parts of the country. Well, in the southern United States and in Florida, we have hurricane country. We have hurricane season, therefore that's why we're kind of known as hurricane country. So that's why we need to be ready. Nothing else that I've shown. This is the reason why. So yes, all signs point to an active season, potentially an extremely active season, if things line up as we think they might. But hurricane season is a marathon. Sometimes it can start slow, sometimes it can start fast, and then things can slow down. But when we really need to be ready, yes, we need to be ready at the beginning of hurricane season, certainly, as you've heard from Kimberly, from Sandra, from Crystal, from everyone, right? But by the time we get to August, we really need to be ready, because that's the time of year when, historically speaking, we've been hit the most by not just hurricanes, but major hurricanes. It's August, September, and October is the peak for the Atlantic Ocean hurricane activity. It is also the time of year when, or the time of the season, when we've been hit the most by hurricanes. So August, September, and October. Don't forget October. Sometimes people say, oh, September's the worst. Actually, October is the month in which, if you pick of any of those 3 months, actually October is the one in which Florida's been hit the most. So really all 3 months. So the first key point is to be ready, right? You've already heard that several times, and you're going to hear it again. An active overall season does not significantly increase our likelihood of being hit. Those are determined by other factors that we can't anticipate or forecast this far in advance. So again, our message, prepare the same as any other year. Now, when it comes to the forecasting, right, people will ask sometimes, how are the forecasts doing? Are you all getting better? And I think the answer, just go back over the last 20 or so years, the answer is yes. The Hurricane Center track and intensity forecasts for all tropical storms and hurricanes have improved. And that's what these graphs show. The lower numbers to the right, which is basically the current time, that's telling us that the errors, or that the difference between the forecast and the actual track is less, which means that we're more accurate, we're more accurately forecasting the track of the storm and the intensity of the storm. Are we perfect? No. Are we getting better? Yes. So this is important for any storm, but it's especially important when it comes to storms that can sometimes form and get very strong very close to us. Yes, we've had many examples of storms that have given us many, many days of advance notice, right? So, we're tracking a storm, tropical waves coming off the coast of Africa, and they become a hurricane way out there in the eastern Atlantic Ocean, many, many, thousands of miles from Florida, and we could track it for days and days, and the hype gradually builds, and, we've had quite a few of those in our history. But we've also had a good number of events or storms or hurricanes that have developed very rapidly, very close by, and only given us essentially a couple of days to get ready. Those 10 storms you see on that map, those are the 10 strongest hurricanes to hit the U.S. So the 10 strongest are those right there. All 10 of those were tropical storms 3 days before they made landfall as categories 4 or 5. So think about it, from tropical storm to Cat 4 and 5 in 3 days or less. It happened with Hurricane Andrew in 1992, which hit South Florida, it hit South Miami-Dade County. It happened with Hurricane Ian just 2 years ago that hit Southwest Florida. Hurricane Charlie hit Southwest Florida in 2004, it did the same thing. Hurricane Michael in 2018, we've had several of these have hit Florida. So we're in an area that is prone to having these types of rapidly intensifying storms. So we can't assume that we're going to have a lot of days to get ready. Again, underscores the importance. We need to be ready before the storms form, not when they start to form, because it might be too late even by that time. So I'm going to show it a scenario. Now, this did not happen as depicted. This is a scenario that we just, that we came up with to illustrate what this potential is and what it could look like. So let's say we have a situation here where we have a tropical depression, a forming system That's south of Cuba, between Jamaica and Cuba. It's forecast to move north over the island of Cuba and then gradually dissipate with very little to any threat to South Florida. So you see there appears to be no threat at all to South Florida. Now let's move forward in time 60 hours. That's 2.5 days. Same storm, but instead of dissipating, now we got a Category 5 hurricane getting ready to move and getting ready to make landfall in South Florida. From a tropical depression to a Category 5 in 60 hours. So you might be thinking, well, this is just some made-up scenario. You know, it's not going to happen. Well, it didn't happen here, or it hasn't happened here exactly as depicted, but it did happen in Mexico. It happened last year with Hurricane Otis that hit Acapulco, you know, pretty big city, big tourist destination. It hit them squarely, you know, the eye went right over the city as a Category 5. 60 hours before, it was a tropical depression just to their south. So this same scenario I just showed, all we did was move the storm from Mexico to Florida. So it just goes to show you, this has happened before, not in Florida, but it happened in another place that does get hurricanes. So there's nothing to say that this cannot happen here or anywhere near Florida. Now, is this likely to happen? This is a pretty extreme event. But even if it's not exactly like this, we could get a situation like we've had in the past where we go from a tropical storm to a Cat 3 or 4, or even a 5 in 3 days. It can happen. It's happened before, Hurricane Andrew. It happened with Hurricane Michael that hit the Panhandle. Didn't hit South Florida, but it wasn't really that far from us. So again, we have to be ready. Another challenge is sometimes, because there's so much data, so much information out there, and that's a good thing, by the way. I'm not criticizing all the information that's out there, but sometimes, though, we need to be careful of what we look at and understand what it is that we're looking at. So, a lot of us like to look at those spaghetti maps, the maps that have all the lines that show all the different forecast models and where they take the storm. That's all great. But let's not lose focus on the official forecast. Why? Because when we've run our statistics over the last, several years, the National Hurricane Center forecasts have a lower average error and are more consistent than any one of those individual lines that you see on those spaghetti maps. Yes, some of these computer models are getting pretty good. In fact, they are pretty good. They're getting better and better. They're getting harder to beat. But on average, we still come out ahead of any individual model. But it's a good thing if the models are getting better. And then it's a good thing that the models are getting harder to beat. Why? Because we use those models. So when you see the Hurricane Center forecast, when you see that track and that cone, it's all those spaghetti lines are already baked in to that forecast. I mean, not all of them, but the ones that are the better performing, the better models, they're already being incorporated into the forecast. So there's really no need to have to compare that forecast and say, okay, you know what? I want to get another opinion. I'm going to look at those spaghetti maps. Well, we're already using that data. We're using it to come up with our forecast. And because of that, we have better skill because we add that human factor. The meteorology and weather forecasting is a bit of an art as well. And of course, it's a science, but it's also a bit of an art. It takes experience to understand how the models behave, what the model tendencies are, for example. And that's something that we have not been able to duplicate with machines. Maybe we will someday, but right now we're not there. So right now, the human forecasters are still showing better skill than any of those individual computer models. Tropical storms and hurricanes are multi-hazard impact events. So they're about the wind. That, of course, the wind is what defines the storm. It's what defines the categories of the hurricanes. But we also have to keep in mind that water is a big threat as well. In fact, water is a bigger threat. Water is more dangerous. It's the most dangerous part of a storm. And also tornadoes that can occur in the outer rain bands of these tropical systems. So focusing on impacts, very important, another key point. And it's also another key point within this key point is to pay attention to those watches and warnings. Watches and warnings are the ways in which meteorologists best communicate your risk ahead of a storm. So if there's a high enough chance of a storm hitting us, we'll put up either a watch or a warning, depending on the time frame, for our area, and we'll talk more about that later. Over the last 10 years, of all the storms that have affected Florida, so this is Florida alone, half of the deaths associated with tropical storms and hurricanes have come from storm surge. So 50%, there I think is actually a total of 100 here, deaths. 50 from storm surge alone. And then the others are distributed fairly evenly. That includes wind, rough surf and rip currents, people out there at the beach when they shouldn't be out there, rainfall, flooding. So all the hazards are dangerous, but the water is what claims the most lives. So the Saffir-Simpson scale, we're all familiar with the scale, where it goes from 1 to 5. This is a wind scale. It's not a scale that then refers to the other hazards. It's specifically a wind scale. So as you go up on the scale, of course, the winds get stronger. So a Category 1 hurricane is still a strong storm. I mean, it still has winds that could reach as high as 95 miles per hour. Those are very strong, damaging winds. But as you go up the scale, the potential for destruction gets even higher. As you get to Category 3, that's when we start calling them major hurricanes. So 3s, 4s, and 5s are all have the potential for devastating the catastrophic impacts. But we have the advantage here, especially in South Florida, our building codes are very, we have the strongest building codes, well, certainly here in Florida, and in large parts of the country. And that's because of our hurricane threat. So we can protect our homes, we can harden our homes, we can put those shutters up, and we can make sure our roofs, our straps, and all that stuff that the building code requires, and it can mitigate the damage from even major hurricanes. But the one thing that building code cannot keep away is the water or storm surge. So that's why we pay so much attention to storm surge. That's why we talk about it so much. Storm surge is that rise in water generated by a storm as it approaches land, as it's approaching land, and that water then moves inland and can move inland, for a few miles. So there's factors that determine where and how much surge an area could get. So it's, of course, the intensity of the storm. The stronger the storm, the stronger the winds, the potentially higher surge you could get. But it's also the forward speed of the storm, how fast it's moving towards an area, the size of the storm, and the angle of approach. If it's approaching at a direct angle, like perpendicular to the coast, like hitting it square on, there's a higher storm surge potential. If it's kind of skirting or paralleling the coast, then there's maybe a little bit of a lesser potential for storm surge. So earlier, you were asked if you know your evacuation zone. This is the reason why it's so important to know, because the evacuation zones in Broward County are primarily determined by the storm surge threat from different storms of different sizes and different intensities. In Broward County, it's really pretty simple. There's 2 zones. So Zone A, which is the most vulnerable zone, is the barrier island. So if you live on the beach, you're in Zone A. You're the most vulnerable, even from a Category 1. If you're in the mainland, east of Federal Highway, so if you live from Federal Highway east, you're in Zone B. Zone B is most vulnerable for storms, maybe as high as a category, maybe starting with like a Category 3 and going, of course, up from there. Hurricane Ian, 2 years ago, I think we all remember those videos and pictures that we saw of the awful storm surge flooding that occurred in Fort Myers Beach over in Southwest Florida, where they had over 15 feet of storm surge. And because of that, unfortunately, there were a lot of deaths. In fact, there were 66 direct deaths. 41 of those were from storm surge alone. And of those, the majority of those were people that were ages 60 and higher. So that, storm surge affects, hurricanes in general, but especially storm surge affects are more vulnerable populations. So that's why it's so important to first of all, know if you live in an evacuation zone, and two, if you do, that has to be number one on your plan, I think. You know, where am I gonna spend the storm? Because if I'm ordered to evacuate by the county because of a storm surge threat, I need to leave. You really need, and this is why you need to leave, because storm surge can be deadly if the storm ends up coming right over us. So we're trying to find ways to communicate storm surge information. So when we put up a forecast, it says we have a storm surge potentially of 3 to 5 feet. Okay, what does that mean? Well, it means that the storm surge in your area could reach 3 to 5 feet above ground level where you are at. So it doesn't mean 3 to 5 feet above the level of the ocean. It means 3 to 5 feet above your ground where you are. We do all the calculation of the elevation across the area. We calculate how high the surge could get offshore. And then we bring that water in using our models, and that's how we can give you at least an idea of how deep that water could be over your ground level. So 3 to 5 feet of water may not sound like a lot, especially when you compare it to other storms when we've had, 10, 15 plus feet of water. But 3 to 5 feet of water is enough to be life-threatening. We saw over in Naples with Hurricane Ian. Naples was not in ground zero, although they were pretty close. 3 people drowned from storm surge, and the storm surge in that area was about 5 feet or so above ground level. So 3 to 5 feet of moving water is enough to be life-threatening. So there, in front of our building at the National Weather Service, we have this pole that is colored, and the colors are broken down in 3-foot increments. And those colors match up with the storm surge inundation forecast that you see on the National Hurricane Center website. So when we forecast the storms, we're putting these storm surge forecast maps on there, and they're color-coded the same way that pole is. So if you're in the yellow, for example, that yellow means anywhere from 3 to 6 feet. And that's me standing next to the pole. I'm just under 6 feet tall. So if we're saying 3 to 5 feet, that's, for me at least, that could be up to close to neck high. So think about it. That's one way that we're trying to visualize the information in a way that people can relate and understand. So when you see these maps that we publish with every forecast, the one on the right especially, that's the potential storm surge inundation map. The colors match up with that pole. And of course, there's a legend on there, so it tells you areas in red have the potential for greater than 9 feet of storm surge flooding. And that's greater than 9 feet above ground level, anywhere where the color is red. Orange is 3 to 6 feet, orange is 6 to 9 feet, potentially above ground level, anywhere in that area that's colored in orange. Another visualization that we're going to be experimenting with this year is we're going to be putting up the wind watches and warnings. We're going to be overlaying those on the same map where you have your forecast cone. So we're still going to have the forecast cone. So the legacy map on the left, that's which we've had for now over 20 years. We're still going to have that. So that's the forecast track, and the cone depicting the area that has a 2/3 chance of the center falling anywhere within that area. And then what we did was, we want to be able to depict where the wind watches and warnings are located over inland areas. Because as you know, in Florida, the wind doesn't just stop at the coast, or anywhere for that matter, but especially in Florida. Just because, so if we show the old map or the legacy map that just has the colors right along the coast, well, what if you live 15 miles inland? What if you live 5 miles inland? With parts of Pompano Beach are, could be as much as maybe 5 miles inland. Well, we want to be able to show you what your wind threat is in that location too. So that's what the map on the right, that experimental map that we're going to be rolling out around mid-August, that's going to show you the forecast cone like we've seen before. But in addition, we're going to be putting those wind watches and warnings on there with the different colors, showing you what those different watches and warnings are. So this is a way of us being able to see what our wind threat is in relation to the forecast. so that we really start to de-emphasize the cone. The cone only tells you where the center of the storm is more likely to be. It's not telling you where the storm is going to be felt. Because as the storm gets closer to the coast, the cone gets smaller. But the size of the storm doesn't get smaller. So here's an example of, this is a pretty typical situation, and this is what happened with Hurricane Ian back in 2022, where you see the yellow area, that's the wind field around the center of Hurricane Ian. Look how much bigger it was than the cone when it started to get close to Southwest Florida. In fact, it was almost getting all the way over to Southeast Florida. So the cone is not an indicator of where the storm is going to be felt. The cone is only telling you where the center of the storm is more likely to be. But those areas that are outside the cone could still get, and do get, impacted by strong winds. They get impacted by storm surge, depending on the exact location, and they can get impacted by tornadoes too. So we depict that by showing maps that tell you what the potential impact is. So that's how we describe it. It's a potential impact map. So what we do is we make an assumption, and this is an assumption that pretty much comes true most of the time, if not all the time, that our forecast is not going to be perfect. So what we do is, okay, we have our forecast track. That's the white line you see there. But then behind the scenes, we're running all these alternate tracks. Think of it like, okay, they're like what if tracks. What if the storm does shift, maybe move a little bit more to the west? What if the storm ends up actually going a little bit more to the east than forecast? That's entirely possible in every storm. Well, we have to account for that when we're conveying to you what your threat is. We can't assume that it's going to be a perfect forecast, especially the farther out a storm is from us, the more likely that it can make small changes to its track before approaching our area. So we take all those into consideration when we decide on watches and warnings, and when we decide on drawing these potential impact maps that really tell you what you should be prepared for. So, and they never conform to the cone. The cone gets smaller as the storm gets closer to us. Remember that. But the area of impact does not get smaller. So in each of these examples here, the impacts extended well away from the cone. So these threat and impact maps, these potential impact maps that I just described, they're published on the National Weather Service Miami website, weather.gov/Miami. They're included in the briefing packages that we send to Kimberly and the team here at Pompano Beach, and all of the emergency managers across the area, all of our media partners as well. And these depict what is the reasonable worst case scenario for each of those hazards in any given area based on those what if scenarios. So these aren't necessarily forecasts of what's going to happen. This is an indication of what level of threat to prepare for given a safety margin. So we take the official forecast, and then we take those hundreds of realistic alternate scenarios, some that go left, some that go right, some that are stronger, some that are weaker, and then we put that all together, we run some scientific formulas, and we come up with this information. So we feel that this information can get us more ready, can get us appropriately ready based on that level of threat. So they're color-coded based on the threat for each of those hazards. The warmer colors are higher levels of threat. We do it for the wind, for the storm surge, flooding, rain, and tornadoes. They're all evaluated individually. So we're giving you additional information. We're not just settling with the cone and that's it. We're giving you additional information that we're running behind the scenes that we're actually providing to you. So we feel that this can really set us up to be as prepared as we can be. And that's why we pass this information along in our briefings to emergency managers. Okay, let's get back to the watches and warnings. I talked about them briefly earlier. So another way that we use all these alternate scenarios is in determining where to put up watches and warnings. So watches and warnings are never ever issued for a single point. they're usually issued for a certain geographic area. And that's the reason why, because we have to take into account two things: the size of the storm, and we also have to take into account the potential that the storm itself can shift in its track. Even a small shift can make a big difference. So a watch, whether it's a hurricane watch, a storm surge watch, that means that those conditions are possible somewhere within the watch area, generally within 48 hours. When we issue a warning, that means that whether it's a hurricane warning, storm surge warning, that means that those conditions are expected somewhere in the warning area, generally within 36 hours. So that's how we communicate your risk, through those potential impact maps and ultimately through the watches and warnings. This is a great example. This event is a great example of all of our trusted sources coming together. This also happens when there's storm. This happens before the season starts. This happens when we do these hurricane preparedness events. And it also happens when there's storms brewing out there that are posing a threat to South Florida. So we're talking trusted sources are the National Weather Service, our local media, and also our local officials. So we have, Kimberly, Crystal, and the emergency management team here in Pompano Beach. They're a great team to work with. We worked with Kimberly and Crystal for many, many years now. Believe me, there's a lot that goes behind the scenes. When they're activated, or when they're thinking about activating the EOC, they're basing that information off of off of our briefings, off of the information that we're providing them, all this information that we've seen and more. So that requires close coordination, that requires those solid relationships, and we're fortunate to have those solid relationships here. So also our local officials, all these trusted sources have to come together. So that's why we ask you to trust the information that comes from the city, because again, we're all communicating very closely before and during an event. We update our forecast every 6 hours. So we want to make sure that you stay up to date with the latest forecast. Base your preparation and your level of preparedness off of that latest forecast. Don't fall into an anchoring bias trap, which anchoring means, okay, you're like using a forecast from like maybe a day ago or 2 days ago, and that's maybe one that you seem to like, or maybe you thought was so scary that it just prompted you to take action. That's fine, but stay up to date, because things can change. That's why we're there 24 hours a day. There's Weather Service meteorologists working around the clock, looking at the latest information, all those models that we talked about, and using that information to come up with the best possible forecast. All right, 2 more things. The threat from a storm does not end when the storm passes. So there's 2 stages. There's the storm and the threats that they bring, which we've talked about, and there's also the threats that linger for days afterwards. Unfortunately, there's always a high number of injuries and fatalities after the storm passes that are caused by a combination of factors, such as vehicle accidents. We lose power, right? After any storm, especially a hurricane. So traffic lights aren't going to be working, and that can lead to an increase in vehicle accidents. Heat illness. Hurricanes hit during what can often be the hottest time of the year. So when we have no AC, no power, no air conditioning for several days, that heat stress can multiply, especially when we're out there cleaning up debris. We're out there exerting ourselves and being worried about cleaning up our properties. And that leads to an increase in heat illness and death from heat. Carbon monoxide poisoning from running generators too close or inside the home. So very, very important that you follow those safety tips, to stay safe after a storm. Avoid flooded areas because they could be obscuring down power lines that could still be live, for example. All those things are, we have to make sure that we are prepared for, and that we are highly aware of after a storm while we're, trying to get back to normal. So, to wrap up here, weather.gov/Miami, that's our website. That's the information that's on the Pompano Beach website. A lot of that information comes from the National Weather Service website, as Sandra mentioned earlier. Take every storm seriously. Take every storm threat seriously. Hopefully, any storms we get this year will be like the ones like we've had recently, where maybe where we've had some near misses, or we've had maybe some just very mild, comparatively mild storms. But we can't make that assumption. We have to take every storm threat seriously, because all it takes is a small change, and it could be all the difference between a near miss and a direct hit. So I thank you very much for your time tonight, and have a great, but most of all, have a safe hurricane season. Thank you.
Before you leave, I just wanted to present you with this certificate of appreciation on behalf of the city of Pompano Beach. He's a tremendous partner of ours all year long.
Thank you. Thank you.
Not just during hurricane season, we do so much together, and I really appreciate that, because even he's like the calming voice days before the storm when we start our conference calls and all the webinars that we do round the clock. But we appreciate everything you do, and the city of Pompano Beach, on behalf of our residents, we appreciate what you do. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Now,